This week on States of America.
This is the end. This is the end game.
I think a lot of folks think that the Attorney General is the top cop. And in Virginia, that's just not true.
So we launched Selena the series, and it was immediately the #1 show, not just in Mexico and the rest of Latin America, but in the United States.
I'm a gay Black man in America. Anytime I make a choice, it's because I'm thinking about 4 steps ahead.
We are in the midst of one of the great symbols of American democracy, the peaceful transfer of power. President-elect Joe Biden is continuing to make appointments to his cabinet. And of course, there are a number of things happening across the country to ensure that happens. However, meanwhile, President Trump is continuing to challenge the results of this election in certain places. To chat about that and much more, we welcome in USA Today 2020 elections editor, Anna Ashburner. Anna, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Okay, so there are a couple of challenges by the Trump campaign to state certifications, a multi-state challenge that's originating out of Texas. What do we know about this?
Sure. So, like you said, a challenge coming out of Texas that was signed on by attorneys general from several other states trying to overturn the results in several states, alleging that those results were fraudulent in some fashion, and asking the United States Supreme Court to step in. Most legal scholars and constitutional experts agree that this lawsuit is not going anywhere, and it would be, I think, truly unprecedented in American history for something like this to go forward and to see these votes overturned.
Meanwhile, President-elect Biden has selected another member of the Big Four, as Susan Page clued us in on, General Lloyd Austin for Secretary of Defense, really continuing this theme of having a diverse cabinet and administration, right?
Yeah. General Lloyd Austin, retired general, 4-star general, would be the first Black person to lead the Defense Department. Joe Biden also this week, it was reported that Marcia Fudge, a representative from Ohio, is going to take over housing and urban development. She would be the second Black woman to lead that department. So Joe Biden has had, has faced some criticism, had a meeting this week with civil rights leaders about, what his administration looks like, what his cabinet looks like, and if he is upholding that promise to really have an administration that looks like the country. And thus far, I think he has. We're about halfway through the appointments in the cabinet. But outside of the cabinet, there are thousands of positions that need to be filled in the White House. So it extends beyond just cabinet positions. And really, what will this administration look like in the rank and file day to day in the White House?
That said, is it because you've seen a lot of chatter about comparing and contrasting, Biden's appointments to Trump's appointments 4 years ago? It's too early for that conversation?
I don't think it's too early for that conversation. I think we've already seen that Biden's appointments are markedly different. Most of Biden's appointments are people who have years of government experience, whereas you saw in Trump's appointments, many of them came from the private sector or had little government experience. But I'm always hesitant before we see the full picture to say historic, that there's historic diversity. Obviously, some of these choices are historic in their own right. Having the first immigrant and first Latino man to lead DHS, the first woman to lead the Treasury, in themselves, a lot of these appointments have been historic.
All right, Anna, looking ahead here, because obviously we're continuing to monitor President Trump's challenge to these election results, but obviously these results continue to get certified and we move forward. What's going to happen next week?
So on Monday, the Electoral College will meet, which is something that I'm sure most of us normally do not pay attention to during an election. And that's really when the electors from individual states will come to their state houses and cast their ballots for president. So in Michigan, which Joe Biden won, Democrats pick a slate of electors. Those Democratic electors will show up at the state house. They will cast their ballots for Joe Biden. And then when all of those electoral votes are counted, you'll have that official number, when you see 306 to, I think, around 220 that Trump got, that's what we're talking about, Electoral College votes. So really, that is, the end game. This week, we saw the safe harbor deadline pass. for the Electoral College, which basically means Congress is bound by law to accept the results in states that have certified their elections by that date. I think 49 out of 50 states did that. Wisconsin's was the only one that was still a little up in the air due to some legal maneuvering. But really, this is, a constitutionally regulated process. And when the Electoral College meets and casts those ballots, that's the end game.
All right. So the electors cast their votes on Monday, Anna, and then is this over?
Yes. I mean, legally, I obviously am not a lawyer. I'm a journalist, but I pay attention to a lot of what legal experts say and just general knowledge of how this process works. Overturning an election after the Electoral College has legally cast these ballots when Congress is constitutionally required, to accept them. This is the end. This is the end game.
USA Today 2020 elections editor Anna Ashbrenner. Anna, thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having me.
I think over the course of many years, I've become sort of conditioned to think that the attorney general is the top cop, that you're the chief prosecutor for the state. And in Virginia, that's just not true.
In the late 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson created the Kerner Commission, a group that looked into the underlying issues that led to urban rioting in the midst of the civil rights movement. And it was determined that the United States was heading into two separate directions, two separate societies, essentially, one black and one white, separate but unequal. Fast forward to 2020, and Delegate Jay Jones says that's still happening in his state of Virginia, but he's got a plan for it. And he joins us now here on States of America. Delegate Jones, thanks for the time.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here with you guys this afternoon.
So we should also mention, of course, that you're a Democratic candidate for Attorney General in the state of Virginia. And as a part of your plan as running for AG, you are trying to create a civil rights division within the Attorney General's office. So I guess, why did you decide to do this?
Well, it's an interesting question. And certainly in 2020, we've seen a lot of different things, from the pandemic to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Jacob Blake. It has really brought issues of race to the forefront. And it was sort of disturbing to me that in Virginia, we don't have an office in the Attorney General's office that's dedicated to investigating situations like that. Those things happen all the time. They just might not be taped like we saw during this pandemic. But we want to make sure that we're protecting citizens and giving them every opportunity to be afforded their rights under the law and have those rights be protected. And so that's why we have proposed the creation of the Office of the Civil Rights Division in the Attorney General's office that would have full investigatory power to go and try to figure out how to root out racism, bigotry, all of these things that we see in our society, and really give the office the teeth that it deserves here in Virginia. What we have to do is we have to empower the Attorney General's office. In Virginia, the way that the office is sort of set up, the powers are vested by the legislature. So the Attorney General is constrained by whatever is statutorily given. And this doesn't necessarily fall within any particular statutory sort of purview that we've given the Attorney General's office in the past. And so I think we're long overdue for something of this nature. Most other states have this office or something akin to it. And again, every Attorney General's office across the country is a little bit different.
Delegate Jones, as you've created this idea and obviously written an op-ed about it as well, have you leaned on any personal experiences that led you to this decision that you wanted to create this unit within the AG's office?
Certainly my family's experience here in Virginia, I'm the descendant of slaves on both sides, 5 generations back. So I like to think that we are a real Virginia story, but we've had successive generations where we're dealing with things like this. My grandparents were very involved in the civil rights movement. My parents were sort of at the forefront of this as well. My father integrated a school when he was 6 years old. I can't imagine doing that. And so I give them all of the praise for their courage. But, seeing those things, seeing my experiences, having people hurl slurs my way, going to school and being taunted, teased with those sort of epithets, that's not easy for anybody. I wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but it happens. And it happens into adulthood. And whether it's those instances, whether it's what you saw in Fairfax with Derek Thompson, who was an unarmed motorist who was yanked out of his car by the Virginia State Police.
And I'm making it known I am no threat to this officer. I've been threatened.
Watch the show.
My life is in danger. My life is in danger.
How do you like that? How do you like that?
That needs to be investigated and vindicated. This unit would do it. Down here in Hampton Roads in Portsmouth, Virginia, my colleague, Senator Louise Lucas, was charged by the police for inciting a riot at a peaceful protest below a Confederate monument. And so that is a situation where we said, look, it's time for a unit like this. We are overdue. Those rights need to be vindicated. They need to be those situations need to be investigated. And so taken together, right? Virginia has a long history of racial sort of discrimination, insidious discrimination, but now we see it's grown, whether it's gender, the LGBTQ community, religion. This unit would cover all of that. And so that's why I think it's time, we're overdue for the Civil Rights Division in Virginia.
For those who are surprised that there isn't already a Civil Rights Division within the Attorney General's office, I guess, what are the misconceptions that they have about the Attorney General?
I think a lot of folks, over the course of many years have become sort of conditioned to think that the Attorney General is the top cop, that you're the chief prosecutor for the state. And in Virginia, that's just not true. I think that's a myth that's been created through several election cycles for people to score political points. In reality, the office is a consumer protection office. It's an office that's aimed at and geared toward making sure that Virginians are not getting gouged on their prescription medication, that we have clean air and clean water. And so this bill would only really seek to expand the purview to, I think, what is a natural extension for the Attorney General to do is to seek to investigate and vindicate folks' civil rights. I would venture to guess that most people would assume that the office already has this ability to do so. However, in Virginia, everything that the Attorney General does is vested by the legislature. And so that's why this legislative solution is necessary for us to do this to go forward.
Virginia Delegate Jay Jones, thanks for the time. Happy holidays.
Thank you very much. Happy holidays to you too.
These spaces don't want me is not going to stop me from walking those spaces and saying, you have to see me, you have to hear me. And I'm going to try to hear you out as well, but I'm going to keep doing that work.
Welcome back to States of America. I'm Ralphia Versa. Our next guest is the quote unquote culture expert from Netflix's Queer Eye. However, if you're like me, you remember him as being the first openly gay African-American man on reality TV when he joined MTV's The Real World back in 2004. Karamo Brown is up to a lot of things now as we approach the holidays, and he joins us here on States of America. Hi, Karamo. How are you?
I'm really good. First of all, you're killing that turtleneck game, my friend. You're looking smooth.
Thank you, sir. This is a new thing for this season. I don't know if you're getting that same vibe. Are you in LA right now or no?
I am. I'm in LA.
Okay, I'm in New York, and I got the turtleneck vibes for this season for fall into winter, and so I've been adding them to the wardrobe.
You're killing it. It looks great, man.
I appreciate that. How are you doing?
I'm actually really good. This has been a challenging time for all of us, but it's about finding moments of connecting with yourself, connecting with others, which has been so great. I really look at 2020 as this year of growth, and I'm really excited.
I'm curious now as we head into this rather unprecedented holiday season that's going to look so different for so many families, yet at the same time, from a political and a social standpoint, many of these families and friends for that matter are still divided on some issues. How are you leaning on your experience as a social worker to maybe give advice to others and then for yourself to get through this time, this season?
Well, I think for anyone who is going to be engaging in-person or virtual conversations during the holiday around politics, I think the first thing you have to understand is that you can't solve the traumas and the triggers that we've all been experiencing over the past year in one conversation over the holidays. So I think it's preparing yourself for that. If you're trying to engage, understand that you have to know that there's not going to be a solidified outcome at the end of this, because people are still experiencing on both sides, this sort of like agony of defeat, or like, oh my gosh, I feel, empowered by the success now. And so people are like still in a very hostile place to some degree. So what I think, if you must engage in conversations, my granny used to say to me, you have two of these, one of these, you should be doing one more. So listen more, empathetically listen, allow yourself to hear what the other person is saying, make sure that they're willing to hear what you're saying, but also know that while you're listening to each other, it doesn't mean that you have to come up with a solution or come to a common ground. It just means you now have perspectives. I tell people, if this was an argument between a couple, after the argument and after all of the vitriol that was, said to each person, you would normally say, walk away, then come back. And I think we're in that space right now where people should feel empowered about walking away, not saying that they're going to walk away forever, but finding themselves the calmness, starting to heal so that we can then come together and talk individually about solutions for each specific topic.
It's maybe easier actually with families than it is when you involve social media now.
Yeah, I don't think that social media is ever a place to engage in any type of conversation about politics, about anything, because unfortunately the problem that we have with social media is that people don't have all the facts. People read headlines, they don't read the full articles. People also don't know any type of back work that has went into anything that someone's doing.
I was thinking of you when I saw this Matthew McConaughey story. Did you see him trending recently, and why?
I did, and I didn't listen to the podcast between him and Russell Brand yet.
It's on your platform with Russell Brand, Luminary. Come on, you didn't listen?
It is on my platform, yeah, but I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. But one of the things that I do know about this is that I don't know what Matthew McConaughey said, but I think that we should always just, again, invite people to have a conversation, to be able to continue to talk about how their actions or whatever makes us feel. Again, I think counseling people instead of canceling people is the most important thing that we can be doing for each other.
Well, Matthew kind of had a similar, and it was that same kind of idea where people were taking a soundbite and or a headline and not listening to the entire conversation and taking all the facts in. But he had a similar sentiment, I feel like, to kind of what you've done, I guess, throughout your activism as far as not being afraid to reach out to the other side and at least engage in conversation. And of course, as you know how that ends in the social media era, you're going to get blowback from both sides. So I'm just curious, as you went through that, and you went to the White House and met with Karen Pence to fight for arts funding. Obviously, you were with Sean Spicer on Dancing with the Stars. What was it like to go through that, especially in this day and age?
It's difficult because these are people's whose views I do not agree with. When I walked into the White House and I met with Karen Pence's chief of staff, when I was working with Sean Spicer on Dancing with the Stars, these are not people that I would ever agree with politically. But what I do believe is that for some of us, we have the ability and access to say, well, listen, I feel that I can take on the burden to walk into this room and speak to those who have different point of views than me. And for me, it's one of these things where I get when people get upset because they're like, are you a traitor? Are you whatever? And I'm like, I'm a gay Black man in America. You think I have the opportunity or the liberty to do anything that's going to go against me? Anytime I make a choice, it's because I'm thinking about 4 steps ahead. How can I change the fundamentals of an organization? How can I change a political party that I'm not a part of? How can I try to affect those individuals? And, in the moment, people get upset, and I respect and understand what they're feeling. But for me, it won't stop me from still walking in the spaces where I'm not wanted because of my race, because of my sexual orientation, because of the fact that I support, trans rights, the fact that I support so many different things. These spaces don't want me is not going to stop me from walking those spaces and saying, you have to see me, you have to hear me. And I'm going to try to hear you out as well, but I'm going to keep doing that work. That's just what it is. Before we let you go, what's the status of Queer Eye as far as taping? We were taping season 6 in Austin, Texas. We shot 1 full episode and then COVID hit and they were like, go home. And so, we're waiting for us as Americans to work together so that we can end this pandemic and come to a certain page, because for Queer Eye, it's all about connections, about hugging, it's about holding hands, about making people see that they're not alone. And so we can't really do that if we got to stay 6 feet apart. And so, once we all come together as Americans and say, each of us have a responsibility to do our part to make sure that we can end this pandemic, then Queer Eye will go back to shooting. And so hopefully it will be, in February, March, but who knows at this point.
We launched Selena the series on December 4th, and it was immediately the #1 show, not just in Mexico and the rest of Latin America, but in the United States. There are more movie and TV options to binge and watch than ever before. Yet, why is it that Hispanic actors are so underrepresented still on screen? A recent study came out and it showed that of the top 100 shows, just 5% of speaking roles were held by Hispanic actors. Jaime Davia is trying to change that. He started at Bravo as a development executive and now has his own production company. He's behind the new Selena series on Netflix, and he joins us now on States of America. Jaime, thanks for the time. No, thank you for having me.
So I'm curious, obviously before you started your production company, as I mentioned, you were with Bravo. What were some of those experiences at that network as a development executive that led you to eventually create your own company?
No, well, thanks for that question. I had an amazing experience at Bravo. I remember my first day where I was meeting my boss, and it was Andy Cohen, who was already a TV star at that moment. And I thought, man, he's probably going to be this like TV star and not nice, but it was the exact opposite. He was so nice, and everyone at Bravo was incredibly nice and supportive. But yeah, I was the only Latinx member of the development team and of the current team. And so I often pushed my team to sort of develop more Latinx shows. I eventually got one on air last year, Mexican Dynasties, which was the first series ever featuring Mexicans living in Mexico City to ever air in the United States, which was so exciting. Rihanna loved it, and TV Guide called it the best Bravo show in years. So love that show. But ultimately, when I was at Bravo, I realized, I'm not really I don't see a lot of people like me who are buyers. And then on top of it, I don't see a lot of people like me who are producing this content, who are really showing Hollywood that, hey, you should be developing more Latinx talent in front of behind the camera and showing them that there's this big market. So honestly, my experience at Bravo was so amazing and showed me that there was a hole in the market for Latinx producers and Latinx production companies.
There seems to be this cycle almost that we're trying to break right now, where you have underrepresented voices and you're trying to prove to all of these big networks and platforms and so on and so forth that are so budget centric, especially in this time, that yes, there is an audience, and yes, there are dollar signs there as well, so that you can continue to, raise those voices. How are you and your production company breaking that cycle?
No, thank you for that question too. I mean, I think a big part of how we're breaking that cycle is with the success of our most recent launch, right?
So sweet. Se ilumina desde adentro, igual que tú.
So we launched Selena the series on December 4th, and it was immediately the #1 show, not just in Mexico and the rest of Latin America, but in the United States. And it's been the #1 show now for 5 days in a row. And I think that's the first Latinx show to ever achieve that status on Netflix. And it's a major, major accomplishment for my community, but it also shows Hollywood that yes, this audience does exist. You should be creating more Latinx content. There's an audience there that wants to see themselves, that wants to see themselves succeeding, that wants to see themselves as part of the American mainstream. And I ultimately I'm so happy that Selena series has been successful, because it proves to Hollywood that there is money behind these decisions. It's not just about representation and for representation's sake, which is important, by the way, but there's also a business here. And so I'm very cognizant of that in Hollywood. And I'm now glad that not just my company, but any Latino can sort of point to Selena the series and say, hey, there's a hit.
Is this almost a sigh of relief, the fact that it's a hit right out of the box? Because not only is Selena Quintanilla such an iconic artist and singer, but her fans are so protective of her and her legacy. How did you manage all of that as you were bringing this to Netflix?
Well, look, I was a major fan of Selena too, and the entire Quintanilla family. So I was coming from a place of, I love this story. I love this. And I was born in South Texas, so there wasn't a day where growing up I wasn't listening to Selena y los Dinos. So for me personally, it was a major desire to sort of showcase a Mexican-American family that changed the world. And so the process of producing it was really fun. We got to hire an amazing writing team led by Moises Zamora, who really did so much amazing research and crafted a beautiful story. We were able to hire amazing directors, 2 women of color, Hiromi Kamata and Katina Mora, who also I think had those stunning shots and really connected with the actors. And so what was really exciting about Selena the series was we were able to do it with almost 100% Latinx Mexican cast and crew. And so I think that's also really exciting for us to sort of showcase that we can have hits, we can make the hits, and that as a community, we are as talented as anyone else. So, all of us together, it was a group effort on this series. We understood the pressure, we understood the fans, but we came from a place of we're fans too. And we really want to make sure we celebrate and continue to celebrate the Selena story, not just in 2020, but for generations to come.
I referenced a study from Nielsen. I don't know if you had a chance to spend any time with it at the top of our interview before I brought you on. And it measured screen time from the top 100 shows, films. It was interesting, too, because when you broke it down by, subscription video on demand streaming sites compared to cable TV, broadcast TV, the representation numbers actually seem to go up for Hispanic and for Latino actors. However, then obviously when you factor in the other platforms, it moved closer to that 5%. So I guess you've shown certainly now with Netflix that it's possible, but how do you break through on those other platforms?
Well, I think it's about, I think a big part of that is Hollywood recognizing that they need to do more work, right? And I think what's really great is I do feel like Hollywood is recognizing that change needs to happen. And so I think it starts from the very beginning, right? I think it's when you're building your team at these networks, you have to build a team that is as diverse as the American mainstream. And so I think a big part of that is making sure that your teams have those connections to these markets that maybe you haven't tapped into yet, so you can feed into that. And then I think it's also on top of everything else, it's working with our amazing community. I think, a few weeks ago, over 270 Latinx creatives signed a letter to Hollywood expressing their desire for more authentic representation. And what was great about that letter was just the sheer size of it, right? That it was 270 amazing Latinx talent. So we're here in Hollywood. We already exist. We've been working on hit shows. We make hit shows. And so I would say for these networks where I understand you maybe don't know where to start. You're not maybe a Mexican American or a Colombian American or a Colombiana or whatever, you may not be that. But I would say is there are so many creatives right now in Hollywood that can help you on that journey to showcase the amazing diversity of our country. I'm really encouraged about where we are today, right? Like I remember when I was a kid, and there was no I'm Mexican American. There was no Mexican American families on TV except on Univision, which were Mexican, right? So they weren't even Mexican American. So when today you look at the landscape, and it's you had shows like Vida, One Day at a Time. I mean, Spider-Man Into the Multiverse, he's a Latino Spider-Man, right? So I recognize that Hollywood has so much work they can still do, but I also am very cognizant that, wow, look at the progress we've made. And yeah, I'm very excited about these streamers because I think what the streamers, and as Hollywood sort of recalibrates what their game plan is, it's exciting that these streamers see that there's this market and that there really is this amazing talent, and they're not married to the old ways of Hollywood doing things of, well, have they written on 80 shows before and have they starred in everything? I think Netflix has been a true visionary partner because they really are willing to take risks and chances because their data shows that there's an audience here.
Hi, I'm Selena. You've known me my whole life. When did I go to Mexico?
I think other networks would be smart to start thinking about what their plan is in that space.
Jaime Davia joining us again. He's behind the new Netflix Selena series, which is out now. Jaime, thanks so much for the time. Stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ralphie Aversa, and this is States of America, honest conversations on the issues that matter most.